The music academy was buzzing that afternoon. Parents were whispering to each other, some checking their phones while keeping an eye on the stage. Children with polished shoes and shiny dresses ran around nervously, their families guiding them, making sure they were ready. The atmosphere felt alive, but also tense, as everyone waited for the recital to begin. Chairs were lined up neatly, and the soft hum of conversations mixed with the distant sound of a piano being tuned. Every now and then, a student would step onto the stage to practice a short scale or chord, and the tuning would pause just for a moment to let them find their balance. Among all the noise and movement, a young pianist entered quietly from the side door. Unlike the others, there was no entourage, no parents fussing over what they were wearing, and no siblings tagging along. They were dressed simply, with a plain sweater and jeans. There was nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. Their steps were soft, careful, and they seemed almost invisible to the crowd. But there was a calm determination in their eyes, a quiet strength that only those who truly loved music could carry. As they walked past groups of chatty students and anxious parents, a few whispered under their breath. Some even chuckled. Assuming this newcomer wouldn't make a mark, the young pianist took a deep breath and found a seat near the back, opening a small music notebook to go over the last few notes of the piece they would play. There were other students nearby, chatting nervously about their own performances, laughing at little jokes, trying to ease the tension. Some glanced at the newcomer and whispered, "Who is that? And do they even play piano?" But the pianist didn't respond. Their focus was entirely on the music, on the melody they had practiced countless times in a room that was often empty. Save for a broken lamp and a slightly out-of-tune piano, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the recital. A teacher stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone. Her voice bright and cheerful, masking the slight nervousness in her words. She introduced the event, spoke about the students' hard work, and encouraged everyone to enjoy the music. The audience clapped politely, and one by one students walked to the stage to perform. Each performance received applause, smiles, and nods of approval. Some were brilliant, flawless in technique, while others struggled slightly, missing a note or two, but they were still met with encouragement. It was a room full of hope, talent, and anticipation. Back in the corner, the quiet pianist watched each performance with a mix of concentration and longing. They were not intimidated by the more confident performers, nor were they distracted by the applause or murmurs of admiration from the audience. Instead, they observed carefully, noting the way each student approached the piano, how their fingers moved across the keys, and how the maestro's expressions changed with each note. The maestro, a strict and renowned musician, rarely smiled. His eyes were sharp, his focus unyielding, and his opinions were known to be honest and often critical. Students feared disappointing him, but the young pianist simply watched. Taking mental notes, time passed slowly, and as more students performed, the pianist's turn drew closer. The other students whispered to each other about their excitement, comparing who would impress the maestro most. Parents fidgeted, adjusting cameras and smartphones, ready to capture every moment. The young pianist's calm presence stood in stark contrast to all the nervous energy around them. They did not speak, did not fidget, and did not look around for validation. Instead, they closed their eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, imagining the piano and the music flowing through them as it had countless times in their practice room at home, when their name was finally announced. A few heads turned in mild curiosity. The applause was polite, but minimal. The maestro's eyes flicked up briefly, clearly expecting a simple, unremarkable performance. The pianist walked onto the stage, each step measured and confident in a quiet way. They sat at the piano, adjusted the bench slightly, and rested their hands on the keys. There was a pause, a brief silence in the room, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Some audience members whispered, speculating that the performance might be short or imperfect. They underestimated the young pianist, judging by appearance and demeanor alone. The first note sounded soft and hesitant, almost shy. It was not loud or flashy, and for a moment, some in the audience leaned back, nodding to themselves, assuming their expectations were correct. But then the next note came, smooth and deliberate, followed by another. forming a delicate melody that seemed to fill the room with a quiet energy. There was an unusual control in the movement of the fingers, a fluidity that spoke of countless hours spent learning and perfecting each note. The pianist was not playing to impress, but to express something deeper, a story that had been nurtured in silence and solitude. The audience began to notice the subtle beauty of the performance. The soft melody turned into a flowing piece that carried emotion in every chord. Some parents stopped talking, their cameras lowered, as they realized that this performance was different from the rest. The other students watched silently, some shifting uncomfortably as they realized that the quiet newcomer might have more skill and depth than they had assumed. Even the maestro, known for his critical gaze, paused, his eyes narrowing as he leaned slightly forward. There was a spark of surprise, a hint of intrigue. As the music unfolded with such grace and precision, the young pianist did not rush. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was not a performance born of showmanship, but one born of understanding and patience. The melody carried stories of late nights practicing alone, frustration and perseverance, of small victories and endless dedication. It spoke of a love for music that could not be measured by flashy techniques or outward appearances. Slowly, the audience began to feel the depth of the music. Some leaned forward, captivated. Some whispered to themselves, amazed by the skill they had not expected. The room, once filled with chatter and movement, was now quiet, held together by the invisible thread of the music. As the piece progressed, the pianist's confidence grew. Each hand moved with purpose, each chord resonated clearly, filling the space with warmth and emotion. The performance was not just about hitting the right notes, it was about telling a story, sharing a part of themselves that had been hidden for so long. Every subtle change in tempo, every gentle accent showed mastery beyond years, something that could only be achieved through perseverance and passion. Even the maestro could no longer hide his interest. His eyes followed every movement, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, as if unconsciously keeping time with the melody. He had underestimated this student, and he knew it now. The final notes were played softly, lingering in the air like a gentle sigh. The pianist lifted their hands, took a deep breath, and looked up. There was a brief silence. The audience, stunned, blinked, processing what they had just heard. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing louder and louder, until it filled the entire room. Parents cheered, students clapped in admiration, and even the maestro stood, offering a nod of respect that carried more weight than any words could convey. The young pianist had arrived quietly, underestimated by all, but had captured the hearts and attention of everyone present as the applause continued. The pianist stepped back from the piano, a small smile appearing on their face. It was a smile of quiet triumph, not arrogance, because they knew this moment was not about proving others wrong, but about finally being able to share their music with the world. Every hour of practice, every moment of doubt, every struggle had led to this moment of recognition. They had transformed skepticism into wonder and doubt into admiration, simply by letting their music speak. The performance would be remembered, not for the applause alone, but for the courage, patience, and authenticity that had been poured into every note. When they returned to their seat, the pianist felt a mixture of relief and excitement. The remaining performances continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. People whispered about the quiet student who had stunned everyone. The maestro, usually reserved and critical, occasionally glanced over with a hint of curiosity and respect. The young pianist had changed the atmosphere, reminding everyone that talent and dedication could often be found in the most unexpected places. And in that quiet corner of the music academy, amidst the applause and murmurs, the pianist sat with a steady heart, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that had been nurtured in silence and would now be seen and heard by the world. The young pianist returned home after the recital, walking through quiet streets with the winter air brushing gently against their face. The city was already settling into the calm of evening, and the streets, though familiar, felt different that day. It was as if the applause, the admiration, the respect they had earned had quietly followed them home, lingering in their mind like a soft melody. They unlocked the door to a modest apartment, stepping inside, leaving behind the sounds and energy of the recital hall. The room was small, with worn furniture and a piano tucked into one corner. It was the same piano that had been their companion for years, though its keys were slightly uneven and some notes were off by a fraction. Yet, for the young pianist, it was perfect. It had been with them through every note of practice, every frustration, and every moment of growth as they approached the piano. Memories of long nights of practice came flooding back. They remembered the hours spent alone, often past midnight, when the house was silent. And the only sound was the piano's soft hum. Sometimes fingers would stumble, and mistakes would make them feel frustrated and small. But they kept going, over and over, until the notes became familiar, until the melody flowed naturally. There were no teachers to guide them for many years, no formal lessons to correct their mistakes. They had learned through observation, through listening to recordings, and through sheer determination. The piano had been both teacher and friend, a witness to every triumph and failure. Every moment of doubt and every spark of hope, the young pianist sat at the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys, recalling how difficult the journey had been. They had grown up in a modest household, where life was simple, sometimes too simple. There was never an abundance of money or material things, but there was always love, encouragement, and an unspoken understanding of the value of persistence. They remembered their parents, who had always supported their love for music in every way they could, even when it meant sacrifices. Sometimes the young pianist had to balance practice with chores, responsibilities, and small jobs to help around the house. There were days when exhaustion made it hard to sit down at the piano, yet somehow, the music always found a way back into their life. They recalled the people who had doubted them along the way. Some teachers had said that learning without formal lessons would never lead to success. Some peers had mocked the idea that anyone could become skilled without constant supervision or a perfect instrument. Even family friends had questioned whether they were spending too much time on something that might never bring recognition or reward. At first, those words had stung deeply, but over time, they became fuel. The young pianist had learned to convert doubt into motivation, letting the music speak louder than any comment or judgment. Every moment of skepticism had pushed them to practice harder, to explore nuances of the piano that others overlooked, to listen to their own instincts and emotions rather than external opinions. Despite the challenges, the young pianist had moments of quiet joy that were worth every struggle. They remembered the day they first played a piece perfectly, the way the melody had floated across the room and filled them with pride and relief. They remembered the thrill of improvising, of creating something unique, of hearing the piano respond to every emotion. Those small victories, though private, had been monumental. They taught the young pianist that success was not always measured by applause or recognition, but by the satisfaction of growth, by the courage to keep going when no one else believed. Even now. After the recital, the young pianist reflected on the journey with humility. The experience at the music academy had been overwhelming in a good way, but it reminded them that the path ahead was long. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and more times when their skills would be underestimated. Yet, the recital had proven that dedication, passion, and authenticity could break through preconceived notions. The young pianist felt a renewed determination to continue learning, to explore new pieces, to refine their technique, and to keep expressing what words could not capture. As evening turned into night, they began practicing once more. The apartment was quiet, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. Fingers moved across the keys carefully at first, then with growing confidence. They revisited the piece played at the recital, noticing subtle details they had overlooked before. Each note carried not just the melody, but a story of struggle, perseverance, and hope. The music filled the room, echoing gently off the walls, and for a moment, the young pianist felt a sense of completion, of belonging, of having found a place in the world through sound. They remembered the moments when the music had been the only solace, the only outlet for feelings that could not be spoken. There were times of loneliness, of doubt, when it seemed easier to give up, to leave the piano untouched. But each time the music called them back, as if it had a life of its own. They had learned patience, not only with the instrument, but with themselves. Mistakes were no longer failures, but lessons. Every wrong note had a purpose, guiding them toward better understanding, toward growth. The young pianist also reflected on the relationships that music had fostered. Though many peers had doubted them, there were a few who had quietly supported and encouraged their efforts. Teachers who had noticed progress, even if belatedly, had offered guidance that felt meaningful because it was earned. Music had connected them to a broader world, beyond the small apartment, beyond the modest beginnings, allowing them to communicate feelings that transcended words. Each piece learned, each performance given, was a bridge to others, a way to share something deeply personal in a way that could resonate universally. That night, as the city outside slept, the young pianists wrote notes in their music notebook. Not just about technique or practice, but thoughts, reflections, and dreams. They wrote about the recital, about the surprise and admiration they had witnessed, about the realization that talent and passion could not be ignored. They wrote about their journey, every step, every struggle, every small victory that had brought them to this point. And they wrote about the future, about the pieces yet to be played, about the stages yet to be walked onto, about the music yet to be shared. Time passed unnoticed. The young pianists lost themselves in the music, fingers dancing across the keys, creating a melody that felt both familiar and new. Each note resonated with memories, with lessons learned, with the quiet satisfaction of having overcome obstacles. The room seemed to breathe with the music, alive in a way that made every effort worthwhile. And as the final notes lingered and faded into silence, the young pianist leaned back, exhausted but content. They had reminded themselves of why they had chosen this path, why every struggle, every long night, every doubt was worth it. Sleep eventually came, and with it, dreams filled with music. The young pianist dreamed not of fame or applause, but of expression, of connection, of sharing the stories that only music could tell. They dreamed of the joy of practicing new pieces, of mastering difficult passages, of touching hearts with melodies born from patience and passion. And in those dreams they felt confident, not because others had recognized them, but because they knew the strength and depth of their own commitment. Morning arrived, bringing with it another day. Another chance to practice, to grow, to perform. The young pianist woke with a renewed sense of purpose. They remembered the applause, the admiration, the respect earned at the recital, but also remembered the quiet nights, the hard work, the self-discipline that made such moments possible. They understood that recognition was fleeting, but dedication, passion, and love for the music would always remain. And with that thought, they approached the piano once more, ready to continue the journey, ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to express themselves fully through the language of music that had been their companion, their teacher, and their friend. The day of the next recital arrived, and the young pianist felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Even though they had performed before, every recital brought new challenges. The hall was the same as last time, with polished wooden floors, rows of chairs neatly lined, a grand piano at the center of the stage. The audience began to gather, chatting softly and finding their seats. Parents and relatives adjusted cameras, students practiced last-minute scales, and teachers moved around, making sure everything was in order. The air was filled with anticipation, a mixture of nervous energy and hopeful expectation. The young pianist entered quietly, carrying their music notebook and sheet music. They were dressed simply, not wanting to attract attention, but focused entirely on the music. As they walked to the seat in the back, a few students glanced curiously, whispering about the pianist who had surprised everyone last time. Some were skeptical, some curious, and a few looked slightly anxious, as if worried that their own performances would now seem less impressive. The young pianist ignored all the whispers, keeping their mind on the music and the emotions they wanted to share. Backstage, the pianist went through their routine. They checked the sheet music, adjusted the bench, and took a few deep breaths. Every movement was calm and deliberate. There was no rush, no need to prove themselves to anyone. The recital was not about competition, but about expression and the joy of music. Yet a quiet determination burned within them. The last performance had been a breakthrough, and now they wanted to continue growing. To explore the deeper emotions hidden in every note, the first few students performed their pieces. Some flawlessly, others with minor mistakes. The applause was polite, as expected. Teachers nodded, making notes for feedback, and parents whispered their encouragement. When the young pianist's turn approached, a subtle tension filled the room. Some audience members remembered the previous performance, wondering if it had been a fluke or if the pianist's skill was real. Even the maestro, who had stood quietly observing before, leaned forward slightly, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. The pianist walked onto the stage slowly, feeling the weight of the audience's attention but not letting it distract them. They sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and rested their hands on the keys. The room was silent, all eyes on the pianist, waiting for the first note. For a moment, a calm stillness filled the air, as if time itself had paused. Then the pianist began to play, gently at first, letting the melody unfold slowly. The notes were clear, deliberate, and filled with emotion. The music was not about speed or technical display. It was about telling a story, conveying feelings that could not be expressed in words. As the performance continued, the pianist's confidence grew. Each phrase was carefully shaped, each chord carefully balanced. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience along with it. The young pianist had learned to listen not only to the piano, but to the space around them, feeling the room respond to each note. The audience was captivated, drawn in by the depth and sincerity of the performance. The music spoke directly to their hearts, creating a connection that transcended words. The maestro, who had seen countless performances, could not help but pay close attention. His eyes followed every movement, noting the subtle control in the pianist's fingers and the way the emotions were conveyed without any showiness. He had underestimated this student before, but now it was clear that the young pianist's skill was genuine, their artistry profound. There was a discipline and understanding in the performance that only came from years of dedicated practice. Often in solitude, guided by a love of music rather than external validation. The audience shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Parents whispered in awe, students exchanged glances of surprise, and teachers nodded, impressed by the depth of the interpretation. The young pianist's performance was not just technically accurate. It was emotionally resonant, expressing feelings that the audience could sense even if they could not describe them. Each note was deliberate, carrying the weight of experiences, struggles, and triumphs that had shaped the pianist's journey. Halfway through the piece, the music took a more dramatic turn. The pianist's fingers danced across the keys, fast and precise, yet every note retained clarity and emotion. The hall seemed to vibrate with the resonance of the piano, and the audience held their breath, caught in the moment. There was no hesitation, no distraction, only the seamless flow of music. The young pianist's concentration was absolute, a testament to the countless hours of practice, the dedication to perfection, and the love for the craft. Every challenge they had faced, every doubt they had overcome, was reflected in the confidence and expression that now filled the room. As the piece progressed, the pianist introduced subtle nuances that added depth to the performance. Gentle pauses, slight changes in tempo, and delicate dynamics created a sense of storytelling, as if the piano were speaking directly to each listener. The audience responded instinctively, their attention unwavering. The atmosphere was electric, yet intimate, a shared experience between the pianist and everyone present. Even those who had initially doubted the young pianist found themselves drawn in. Moved by the unexpected beauty of the music, the maestro's initial surprise transformed into genuine admiration. He observed the pianist's technique, the control, and the expression, silently acknowledging the skill and artistry that he had once underestimated. There was a rare moment of recognition in his eyes, an unspoken respect for the dedication and talent that had brought this performance to life. The young pianist, unaware of the maestro's silent evaluation, continued to pour their heart into the music, focused entirely on conveying the story embedded in the notes. As the piece reached its climax, the emotions swelled. The music was powerful, yet refined, passionate, yet controlled. The audience could feel the pianist's journey, the struggles, the perseverance, the moments of doubt and triumph, conveyed without a single word. It was a performance that transcended skill alone. It was an expression of the human spirit of resilience and dedication. Every note resonated with honesty and authenticity. Capturing the attention and admiration of everyone in the room, the final notes were played softly. Lingering in the air like a gentle echo, the pianist lifted their hands, took a deep breath, and waited. For a moment the room was silent, the audience absorbing the experience they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began, building in intensity until it filled the entire hall. Parents cheered, students clapped, and teachers smiled, impressed by the artistry and emotional depth. The maestro stood, a rare gesture, acknowledging the pianist's talent with a nod of respect that spoke volumes. The young pianist had once again transformed skepticism into admiration. Proving that true skill and passion could not be ignored, the young pianist stepped back from the piano, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over them. This performance was not about proving others wrong or seeking validation. It was about expressing years of dedication, passion, and growth. Every challenge, every struggle, every late night of practice had led to this moment. The applause and recognition were gratifying. But the true reward was the knowledge that their music had touched others, had communicated feelings that words could not convey. After leaving the stage, the pianists returned to their seat, feeling a sense of accomplishment and humility. The rest of the recital continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. Audience members whispered about the young pianist, about the unexpected depth and skill that had been revealed. Even the other students, some of whom had been skeptical, now looked at the pianist with newfound respect. The maestro, who had been critical and discerning, continued to observe with interest, knowing that this performance had left a lasting impression. Later, when the recital ended and the audience began to leave, the young pianist stayed for a while, reflecting on the experience. They remembered the nerves, the concentration, the emotions poured into every note. They thought about the journey that had led them here, the late nights, the solitary practice, the perseverance in the face of doubt. They realized that each performance was a step forward, a chance to grow, to connect, and to share a part of themselves through music. That night, as they walked home, the young pianist felt a sense of quiet triumph. They had once again proven that skill and passion were not measured by appearance or confidence alone. Recognition and respect could be earned through dedication, authenticity, and love for the craft. The journey was ongoing, with new challenges and opportunities ahead. But for now, they allowed themselves to savor the moment, knowing that their music had truly touched the hearts of those who had listened. The next recital arrived with a sense of anticipation that felt heavier than before. Word had traveled about the young pianist's previous performances, and this time, more people were watching. The hall buzzed with conversation as the audience settled into their seats, and a quiet tension filled the air. Parents adjusted cameras, students rehearsed quietly in corners, teachers moved among the chairs, offering last-minute encouragement. The young pianist entered, as always, quietly and with purpose, carrying their sheet music and notebook. Their simple attire did not command attention, but their presence was noticeable now in a different way. People whispered, some with curiosity, some with doubt, wondering if the pianist's skill would continue to shine or if the past success had been a fleeting moment of luck. Backstage, the young pianist took a moment to calm their nerves. They had learned that every performance brought its own set of challenges, no matter how well one played before. They adjusted the piano bench, opened their sheet music, and sat quietly, listening to the sounds of other performers. Some students went on stage with a visible confidence that sometimes masked a lack of depth. While others displayed nerves similar to their own, the young pianist focused inward, recalling the countless hours of practice, the long nights alone with the piano, and the dedication that had brought them this far. They did not need to prove anything to anyone. The music itself was enough, and it had always been their guiding force. When their name was announced, a ripple of whispers ran through the audience. Many were curious, some skeptical, and others excited to witness the performance that had already gained a reputation. The young pianist walked to the stage with calm determination. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. They sat at the piano, adjusted their posture, and rested their hands on the keys. The silence in the hall felt profound, almost as if time itself had paused in anticipation. The pianist took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes were gentle, almost hesitant, but full of emotion. There was a subtle power in the music that drew the audience in, capturing their attention with each chord. The young pianist's hands moved with precision and grace, each note resonating with a clarity that spoke of countless hours of practice and deep understanding of the music. The melody flowed naturally, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt both deliberate and spontaneous. It was not a performance meant to impress through speed or technical feats, but through emotional depth and authenticity. The music carried stories, feelings, and experiences that words could not express, creating a connection with everyone listening. As the piece progressed, the young pianist's confidence grew. The notes became bolder, the tempo more expressive, and the dynamics shifted to reflect the emotions behind the music. The audience could feel the passion in every chord, the careful shaping of each phrase, and the depth of expression that went beyond mere technical skill. Parents leaned forward in their seats, students exchanged amazed glances, teachers nodded quietly, recognizing the dedication and artistry behind the performance. Even the maestro, who had witnessed countless students over the years, watched intently, noting the subtle control and emotional resonance in every movement of the pianist's hands. The middle section of the piece introduced complexity and intensity. The pianist's fingers moved rapidly, yet accurately, creating a cascade of sound that filled the hall. There was a balance between precision and expression, a harmony that could only be achieved through years of focused practice and deep connection with the music. The audience held its collective breath, captivated by the unexpected depth and maturity of the performance. The young pianist's expression remained calm, focused entirely on translating the emotions and story of the piece into sound. Each note carried meaning, each pause was intentional, and each chord progression guided the listeners through a journey of emotion and reflection. As the performance continued, subtle nuances added layers of beauty to the music. Gentle shifts in tempo, soft touches on the keys, and delicate phrasing created a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and moving. The audience responded instinctively, drawn into the narrative woven by the pianist's hands. Even those who had initially doubted the pianist found themselves completely absorbed, feeling the honesty and authenticity behind every note. It was a performance that went beyond technique. It was a conversation between the pianist and the listeners, a sharing of experiences and emotions that resonated deeply. The maestro, known for his critical eye, could not hide his admiration. He observed every movement, every subtle change in dynamics, and every emotional inflection, silently acknowledging the skill and artistry that he had once underestimated. There was a rare moment of respect in his gaze, an unspoken recognition of the dedication and talent that had brought the young pianist to this level of mastery. The pianist remained unaware of the maestro's silent appraisal, focused entirely on the music, letting it flow naturally from their hands to the audience. As the piece approached its climax, the music became more powerful and expressive. The pianist's fingers moved with increasing confidence and energy, yet maintained control and clarity. The hall seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the performance. The audience felt every emotion conveyed through the piano. The young pianist's journey, the struggles, perseverance, and triumphs, was embodied in the music, touching hearts and minds alike. Every chord, every pause, every phrase was a testament to the countless hours spent, mastering not only technique, but also the emotional depth required to communicate through. Music, the final section of the piece, was gentle and introspective. The notes softened, the tempo slowed, and the melody became more reflective. The young pianist allowed the music to breathe, creating space for the audience to absorb the story and emotions conveyed. The hall was silent, filled with the lingering resonance of the piano and the quiet awe of those listening. When the last note faded, The young pianist lifted their hands and took a deep breath. A moment of calm after the intensity of the performance. For a few seconds, there was complete silence, as if the audience were collectively holding their breath, savoring the final impression left by the music. Then, applause erupted, filling the hall with a wave of sound and admiration. Parents cheered, students clapped enthusiastically, and teachers smiled, recognizing the depth, skill, and dedication behind the performance. The maestro stood, a rare gesture of respect, acknowledging the young pianist's talent and the impact of the performance. The pianist stepped back from the piano, a quiet smile on their face, feeling a sense of fulfillment and pride that came not from recognition alone, but from having shared something deeply personal and meaningful with others as they returned to their seat. The young pianist reflected on the journey that had led them here. They remembered the challenges, the long nights of practice, the moments of doubt and frustration, and the perseverance that had brought them to this point. Each performance was a step forward, an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to express themselves through the language of music. The applause and admiration were gratifying, but the true reward was the knowledge that the music had touched others, resonated with their emotions, and created a shared experience that transcended words. Later, when the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, the young pianist stayed for a while, letting the quiet of the space wash over them. They sat at the piano, replaying sections of the piece in their mind, analyzing nuances and imagining new interpretations. The music was both a reflection of the past and a path toward the future. Each performance was a reminder of the dedication, discipline, and passion required to continue growing as an artist. The young pianist understood that recognition was temporary, but the connection forged through music was lasting, and the journey of learning and expression would continue. Walking home that evening, the young pianist felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The applause, admiration, and respect from the recital were gratifying, yet the true value lay in the expression of their dedication and love for music. The journey had been challenging, filled with moments of doubt, frustration, and perseverance. Yet each struggle had strengthened their resolve, deepened their understanding, and enriched their emotional connection with the piano. The recital was not the end, but a milestone in an ongoing journey of growth, learning, and sharing through music. And as they looked forward to the next performance, the young pianist knew that every note played, every melody shared, and every emotion conveyed was a step further on a path defined by passion, resilience, and the quiet power of music. The day after the recital, the young pianist woke with a sense of calm and quiet excitement. The applause, admiration, and recognition from the previous day had left an impression. But it was not what they cherished most. What mattered was the knowledge that their music had truly reached people, that it had conveyed emotions, stories, and dedication that could not be expressed with words alone. They moved through their morning routine with a sense of purpose, preparing for another day of practice, reflection, and growth. Each day felt like a step on a path that was only just beginning, a journey defined by passion, resilience, and the constant pursuit of mastery. The pianist arrived at the music academy, carrying their sheet music and notebook, and found a quiet corner to sit and review pieces for upcoming performances. Other students arrived, some exchanging greetings, others focusing on their own practice. The young pianist had earned a reputation now, though they did not seek attention. People whispered quietly, observing with curiosity, respect, or sometimes skepticism. Yet the pianist remained focused, allowing their music and dedication to speak louder than any words. They began to play, softly at first, allowing the notes to guide them, to shape the space around them, and to remind them why they had chosen this path. During practice, the young pianist reflected on the journey that had led them here. They remembered the countless hours spent alone at the piano, the challenges of learning without formal instruction for many years, and the moments of doubt that had tested their resolve. Each struggle had been a lesson, each failure a guide toward improvement, each small victory a confirmation that dedication and persistence were worth more than external validation. The piano had been a companion, a teacher, and a confidant, helping them to understand not only music but also patience, resilience, and the power of quiet determination. Later that day, the pianist was invited to a small gathering of teachers and students, where they were to play a short piece as an example of skill and interpretation. The room was intimate, the audience attentive, and the pianist felt a familiar blend of calm and focus. They adjusted the bench, opened their sheet music, and began to play. The notes were deliberate, expressive, and filled with emotion. Each chord resonated with clarity. Each phrase carried depth. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the nuance and beauty of the performance. Even seasoned teachers exchanged glances of admiration, recognizing the artistry and dedication that had brought this music to life. The young pianist continued to perform in small recitals, local competitions, and gatherings. Each time, the response was similar: initial skepticism from some, quiet curiosity from others, and ultimately, admiration and respect. People began to recognize that the young pianist's talent was not accidental, but the result of years of disciplined practice, emotional understanding, and unwavering passion. Each performance strengthened their confidence, but more importantly, it reinforced the understanding that music was a means of expression, a bridge between personal experience and shared human emotion. The pianist also began to explore composition, experimenting with original pieces and improvisation. Late nights were spent trying new melodies, combining familiar techniques with personal expression. Sometimes mistakes happened, and sometimes ideas flowed seamlessly. Each moment of exploration was a lesson, a chance to grow, and an opportunity to connect with the music on an even deeper level. The young pianist discovered that creating music was as fulfilling as performing it, and the two experiences reinforced each other, enhancing both skill and emotional depth. As recognition grew, opportunities arose. Invitations to larger recitals, collaborations with other musicians, and workshops with respected teachers became part of the pianist's journey. Each opportunity was approached with humility and dedication. The young pianist understood that talent alone was not enough. Growth required continuous effort, open-mindedness, and a willingness to learn from every experience. They welcomed guidance, advice, and constructive criticism, seeing each as a stepping stone toward refinement and mastery.